Mike Bossy revolutionized the offensive style power forward player. The game changed when Mike Bossy showed up in it. And if you look at Mike Bossy and you look at his statistics, they're otherworldly. There is no player we'll ever see in history in the next 25 years to do what Mike Bossy has done in the 70s and 80s. In 1977, Mike Bossy played 73 games. He scored 53 goals and 38 assists from 91 points in his rookie season. 1978 to 79, 80 games, 69 goals, 57 assists, 126 points. 1979 and 1980, 75 games, 51 goals, 41 assists, 92 points. 80-81, 79 games, 68 goals, 51 assists, 119 points. 1981, which I thought was his best year, not because of goals, but because of his all-around game. He played 80 games, 64 goals, 83 assists for 147 points. And we could go on and on and on of what Mike Bossy has done. 10 straight seasons with 50 or more goals. As prolific as an offensive player is, when we talk about Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux and Gordie Howe, the best offensive players of a generation, you have to put Mike Bossy in between all of them. Mike Bossy, who smoked a lot of cigarettes, passed away from lung cancer. I've heard stories about Mike Bossy. Each period, he'd go to the back and smoke a cigarette or two and get back on the ice. The man has smoked really his whole career and throughout his retirement. Some people say he wasn't as nice of a guy off the ice as he was on the ice, and he wasn't a nice guy on the ice. I don't know Mike Bossy personally. I met Mike Bossy twice, talked 20, 30 minutes with the guy and had a hockey conversation with him. But all in all, he signed all my stuff, and I don't usually get autographs. And Mike Bossy is a true Long Islander. He supported the Islanders from day one, never played for another team. He was an Islander through and through. His 10-year career was fantastic. He didn't have one bad year. His worst year was 38 goals and 37 assists. If that's a bad year, sign me up. The man was revolutionized by his offensive ability. Smart, educated, understand the game, Canadian-born, special player. Al Arbor, who may he rest in peace, said something very interesting about Mike Bossy that I'll always remember. He's never coached a player as offensively as sound as him. Coming from one of the greatest coaches in NHL history, one of the greatest players to ever play this game, Mike Bossy will only and always be remembered as the best offensive player the New York Islanders have ever had.
Absolutely. And you talk about the influence for the Islanders coming into the league as an expansion team in the 70s. And that team, that dynasty, even the startup of it was fueled by somebody like Mike Bossy offensively. When you look at the way he played the game, you were talking about the power forward, those tough goals that he would score, but also having all these 100-point seasons, which is something that was hard to come by in the 60s and the 70s, especially once the expansion team started getting going. And he had 8 of those in his career. He only played 11 seasons comparatively, but he had 8 100-point seasons. Game-winning goals, he led the league in 3 different times. And .76 goals per game is the best among players with 150 games. He is tied with Wayne Gretzky for the most 60-goal seasons and is the only player that scored 50 goals in 9 straight seasons. So for an expansion team like that, a guy that's won 4 Stanley Cups, a guy that's had clutch game-winning goals.
Well, that's going to change now. Alexander Ovechkin will be there.
Sure.
Yeah.
At that time, when it was harder to come by, you have only certain guys that could play to that level for that consistently, and Mike Bossy did that. And the influence, the leadership that he had with the rest of this Islanders team, the way they did for 4 straight Stanley Cups in a row, and they even went to another one the next year. They lost against Edmonton.
Should have won that, by the way, that series.
Yeah. Nevertheless, to empower a community like that, Long Island, that it was the first professional team there. It was a whole new experiment. Everyone knew about New York, but they wanted to expand it somewhere else. They wanted to expand it close by. He really was a big reason for the uplifting of the popularity of hockey on Long Island as we know it. Having that offensive talent, that flash, and having somebody that productive scoring goals. You need that kind of thing to get a community going for the NHL when you're an expansion team. So he really influenced the game in that way as well. So rest in peace, Mike Bossy. Thoughts and prayers to all of his family, sending condolences.
Mike Bossy also was something the game needs here on Long Island. The people out here wanted a star, wanted a guy to look up to in the late 70s and early 80s. And sports out here on the island has really blown up now than it ever has. But in those times, hockey wasn't big here. Basketball, we had a Long Island team where Dr. J came from, Roosevelt, and played for the Long Island Nets before they became...
Yeah, when they were in the ABA.
The New Jersey Nets. And baseball, obviously, the Yankees and the Mets. And they were an expansion team. They won one championship, and Long Islanders were looking for that next championship, which took all the way to 1986 to win. There was no other Long Island team besides the Islanders. The Islanders really transitioned what sports and what hockey was here on the island and what it is today. If you look at all the different Long Islanders that have come out here that became stars in the NHL, one right now on the Rangers, Fox, played in Wantagh. Another guy, McAvoy, who was from Long Beach, who plays for the Boston Bruins. We could go up and down some of the great island players that have come from here and that have significantly made noise in the NHL. It really speaks volumes and really makes the thought of what the Islanders did in the 70s and the 80s to be very, very special. And it has a lot to do with Mike Bossy, because Mike Bossy held the torch to this team. He was the heart and soul of this team. And that's why this team was one of the greatest teams in professional sports history. It was the last dynasty you can ever remember to win 4 championships. And that's what's special about what Mike Bossy was and what he stood for. And may he rest in peace. And a shout out to the Bossy family, because it is a sad situation. We lost Clark Gillies this year and Mike Bossy, 2 captains of this Islander team. And who would have thought that they both would die in the same year, around the same time? It's sad, but it just shows you how close together these players and this team was, all in all.
All homegrown, so.
Yes, it's fantastic. Al Arbor, may he rest in peace, really changed the game as a coach, and he had the players that really changed the game for what it was at that time and for what it is today. Going to another team right now, the New York Rangers, that are heading to the playoffs, not the Islanders, unfortunately. And the Islanders, second half, where the Islanders were one of the best teams in the NHL, played really, really good hockey at the end of the season, but it was a little too late for the Islanders, unfortunately. It would have to be a miracle. Washington would have to lose every one of their games.
They're not losing either. They've only lost once the last 2 weeks.
They would have to lose every one of their games for the Islanders to make it. Just don't see it happening. The Islanders are done. They had a very good season in the second half, and you have to give the Islanders a lot of credit. Their goaltending really started out in the second half of the season. Sorokin, who is not going to get a lot of credit for a Vezina trophy this year because his team didn't make the playoffs, but he was standing on his head all season long. The Islanders finally can say they have a goaltender of the future, a guy that they can depend on moving forward for the next 10 years if this kid wants to stay here and not go back to Russia or play for another team. So it's something to cheer about. I think the Islanders are missing an offensive player. But to get back to the Rangers, this team has been one of the best teams in the NHL. And you have to give them a lot of credit for what Gallant has done to this team, the transition of this team, the way this defense has played this year. Now, believe it or not, the Rangers have a better goals against than the Islanders do. The Rangers right now, goals against, third. For a team that was not known to be a defensively sound team, Gallant has really taken this team to another level. You want to give a lot of credit to Chris Drury, that's fine. He put this team together in certain aspects. This is the same team that John Davidson put together. The players are playing under a different regime of management, and that's why they're a different team. Gallant has this team playing on all cylinders. Offensively, which they're one of the best offensive teams in the NHL, and now arguably one of the best defensive teams in the NHL. I give a lot of credit to their coach, management of the team, and yes, a player that stood for not only for this team over the years, and a lot of fans wanted out of here. Their 50-goal scorer. And Speedy, you know who I'm talking about.
Mr. Chris Kreider, yes, I remember 3 years ago at the trade deadline, everybody wanted them to trade him and not pay him the $6 million, $7 million contract that he wanted. Now, granted, he was still a good player in other areas. He was a great passer. Defense, he could hit a little bit, but he never was a sniper. Now he has 50 goals this season. Fantastic. 71 points overall, and still doing all the other things too. Doing everything else, fits that system greatly with the physicality that Gallant brings, and the defense, as you mentioned, third in the goals against.
Which is amazing.
The only teams that are better right now are Carolina and Calgary. They have a lot more on paper talent on their defense. It definitely shows a lot about the system. It shows a lot about forwards buying into playing defense themselves. Guys like Zibanejad and Strome that have looked better. Even some of the young players, they've played a lot better defensively. And the young defensemen, I think, really making a difference in that. They play in different spurts, but they've all seemed to fit in some way. Braden Schneider's come up and looked good. Zach Jones, in the limited time he's played, has been good. Need depth in the playoffs to do well, and the Rangers have a lot more of it than we would have ever thought at the start of the season. And they're getting the production now from the stars. Panarin's played a lot better in the second half of the season. Zibanejad's been pretty steady all year, too. Adam Fox, he's a special player.
Yes, he is a special player. He's up for a Norris Trophy again this year. Is he going to win? Probably not. They don't usually give back-to-back trophies.
No, I think Roman Yossi's going to win
so
this
do
year.
I. Adam Fox is a special player. He's a special kid. That was another move by, John Davidson. He made the trade.
It was with Carolina. It was originally the Flames draft pick that was traded to Carolina in a different deal. It came out of nowhere, too, because Carolina was a good team that year. They went to the Eastern Conference Finals, but they had so much other defensemen that they felt that they didn't have room for him. And then there was a lot of decision.
Boy, they're smacking themselves in the head right now.
Yeah, now they have a lot of the other Rangers, old ones now. Brady Shea, Brendan Smith.
Yes.
Now,
who played well this year.
He played better than he ever did with the Rangers.
Well,
but
it's also the system. Brandon Smith played on this system. I think he'd be a better player.
Sure. It was just weird because it wasn't, I even thought of it. It was also one of those things where a lot of fans wanted him to not come up right away, too, because they didn't think he was even ready at that time. And he blossomed right away and never looked back.
You look at the Rangers, and there's nothing that you can say that this team has a weakness in it. Their goaltending has been one of the best in the league, too. Shesterkin has been fantastic. 34-11 this year, 2.09 goals against average. His save percentage is amongst the best in the league, .934. He's been a fantastic goaltender. He's probably going to win the Vezina Trophy this year. We all know Fox will be up for the Norris Trophy. He'll probably fall short. Chris Kreider will be up for MVP. He'll fall short.
Yeah, I think Matthews or McDavid is a lock.
McDavid. I think McDavid. He's the best player in the NHL.
Oh, yeah.
And then Shesterkin, I think he will win Goalie of the Year. I think he's been the best Goalie of the Year. The most consistent goaltender in the NHL. The Rangers have finally another Vezina Trophy winner, which they've had years and years of it. If you go back in the 80s, John Van Beesbrook won a Vezina Trophy. Henrik Lundqvist won a Vezina Trophy in the 2000s. And now you have Igor Shesterkin. Goaltending has never been a problem for the New York Rangers. It's always been a strength for them. The weakness of the Rangers over the years is defense. They just never were a good defensively sound team. Even when they won the Stanley Cup in the 90s with Jeff Bukaboom, Brian Leach, Sergei Zubov. That team was a good defensive team, but not a great defensive team. What you've seen Gallant bring to the table is a defensively sound, managed team that are playing together as one unit. And that's what Barry Trotz brought to the Islanders and changed the New York Islanders, and that's what Gallant has done for the Rangers. The Rangers will be going, I think they matched up against Pittsburgh.
As of right now, but they have surged a little bit where they're only 2 points behind the Hurricanes, so they still could get the number one spot. It'll be hard, which I don't want to be because then they'd have to play against the Bruins, which I think have a better playoff identity than the Penguins do. So
yes, I would be afraid of the Bruins. It's crazy to say this, is Tampa they're playing good hockey. After that trade, this team was the last wild card.
They were a wild card team for a little bit, flip-flopping with the Bruins, but they were a wild card team for a good stretch, more than we ever saw before.
You do not want to play the Tampa Bay Lightning right now. They're going to have another surge. They have arguably the best goalie in the NHL. Vasilevsky has been the best goalie in the NHL for the last 7 years. When you get into the playoffs and you're playing a 7-game series, you need good goaltending. You need a goaltender that is going to be a wall for you, and he is the guy. And he will be the guy going into the playoffs. It won't be Shesterkin. He's never really had the opportunity to face playoff teams and offenses that are as good as he's going to see going into this year's Stanley Cup playoffs. But I'm excited for the NHL playoffs, and Ranger fans should be excited. Are they going to be a Stanley Cup championship team? I still think they're going to fall short this year. I think they're missing certain things. We're going to see in the playoffs the weaknesses that they're going to have. But all in all, the Rangers have nothing to cry about. And who knows? Maybe they do go to the Stanley Cup Finals.
It'll be interesting if they end up playing Carolina. If they win their first round series against the Penguins because they have all those ex-Rangers on the team. I mentioned the two defensemen and also Derek Stepan's there too. So will they be able to recognize the tendencies of these young players or the other way around?
It's a different team. Out of all those Rangers, who played with those Rangers on this Ranger team still? Derek Stepan? There was nobody that played on that team when Derek Stepan was there.
Kreider did, and Zibanejad did the first year, but then Stepan got traded after that, the next season.
He barely played with Derek Stepan. Derek Stepan hasn't been there in a long time. Yes, he's an ex-Ranger. I always thought that the Rangers were crazy getting rid of him. I thought he was a very big heart and soul of that team, especially the playoffs. He did make the playoffs. He was one of their best players. I expect the Rangers to have a very good playoff and a very good playoff run, so I'm excited.